This episode was sponsored by the Mental Health Empowerment Agency, where its mission is to dismantle the mental health stigma and raise awareness of suicide prevention through curated events, individual and group peer support, digital and social media, and educational trainings. Welcome to the Black People Die by Suicide 2 podcast, where we discuss all things mental health with an emphasis on suicide and the Black community. I'm your co-host, T-Kea, but you can call me Kia.
And I'm your co-host, Jordan.
So we are excited to really have our first episode because we felt like this podcast was really needed in the Black community because there are tons of mental health podcasts but there really aren't any podcasts that specifically focus on suicide in the Black community. And so before we dive into that, I really just want to share a little bit about me, and then Jordan will tell you all the good stuff about her.
Yes.
So I am a suicide attempt survivor. So that's why I really enjoy discussing suicide, even though it's a very morbid topic. And a lot of people are really struggling to talk about that. And so I live with bipolar disorder. And I actually started struggling with suicidal ideation when I was like around 11. And those thoughts really continue up until my early 20s. And I remember texting a friend during this time. I had a lot going on in my life. I was in graduate school, struggling to pay my bills, dealing with unresolved childhood trauma. So, watching my mom be abused verbally and physically by my siblings' dad. And then I also watch my dad struggle with drug addiction and then also selling drugs. And so just kind of growing up in a low income community and seeing a lot of people on drugs, seeing a lot of people depressed, but it just really wasn't talked about. And so not dealing with that, of course, impacted me up until my teenage years into adulthood. And I remember when I had all this stuff just going on, feeling very overwhelmed, I just got to the point where I was just like, this is a lot. When you have suicidal thoughts for years and you never get help for it, at some point, for me, I felt like it just became too much to kind of like handle. And I texted a friend and I just told her like, it would be better if I wasn't here. And at that time, she didn't know that I took all of these like pills, and I had drank a bottle of wine, and I was hoping that I would just like kind of go in my sleep. And I remember the police showing up, and I just heard like I'm assuming I passed out. I kind of heard like a loud like banging at the door, and they were asking me like, can you make it to the door? And we'll have to come in and like break down the door or the window. And then they came in and they were talking to me, but I was kind of like in and out. And I just remember them saying like, you're a threat to yourself and you need, because you seem out of it. What did you do? So I told them, and I'm grateful that they gave me the option. They gave me the option. They were like, we can transport you. We can call the paramedics and have them transport you, or we will have to handcuff you and take you. And we will talk about that in future episodes because I feel like, how mental health, people who struggle with their mental health are criminalized, and handcuffing people when they're struggling with mental health challenges is just not the way to go. And so I was really happy that looking back, happy that he gave me the option because I felt like I had some sort of sense of control, which I feel like is super important. And so the paramedics came and I was transported to the hospital, and that was my first time like actually having some sort of interaction with like, or being a part of, I guess, like the mental health behavioral health system. And I was terrified. Like, I was so scared. I remember the only image or like what I had about like the psych unit was like Good Burger. So you remember when they went in, and so that was all I had. So I was for sure like, as soon as I left the ER and I went upstairs, I was like, it's over. I'm about to see like people like zombies or mummies. Like, I was so scared, and I remember just crying. I haven't had anything to eat in like 3 days. I think I was like probably going on like 2 to 3 weeks without taking care of my hygiene. So I was really out of it. Like I just got to the point where I stopped functioning. And I did have my therapist at the time, but I wasn't consistent in treatment. And I remember just getting upstairs and I got there. It was just like quiet, but I was just really crying. And I know I felt very trapped because, they strip you of everything
Yes.
that you have. You can't have your phone. You,
Yes.
especially you're on now, I'm on suicide watch. So they're really watching
Really
me
watching you.
like
Yes.
a hawk.
Hmm.
And I remember when I got there and the next day I called my mom and I couldn't get in contact with her because she's in New Jersey. And I called my aunt and I told her what happened. And I will never forget. She was like, "You don't belong there with those people." And I'm like, you know what? She is right. I don't belong here with these people because I am college educated. I'm like, I have a degree from Howard University. Like, I'm so, us Howard people feel like, well, we are better than everybody else. So, I was like, I went to Howard or George. I was like Georgetown for my master's. I'm like, I'm working really hard to try to build a career. I have a car. I have like just going off all these things as if somehow because I have this education or I have this career that I'm working to build that I shouldn't have those issues. That kind of plays into stigma. And I remember telling like the lady, I guess she was like the director or something. She was like over the psych unit. And I was telling her and she was like, and like, okay, like you have all of that and okay. And I will never forget, she told me, you're here because your brain is sick. When people struggle with their heart, they go see the cardiologist. And people come here when their brain is sick. And so essentially what I got from that is there's no difference between your mental and your physical health. Health is health. And I need to take care of my mental health, especially because it impacts everything else.
Right.
And that was like really when I guess it was like a aha moment for me.
Hmm.
And when my mental health journey, I would say like really started and I became a active participant in my recovery. So you can share your story.
Sure. So my name is Jordan. I'm 33 years old. I am a native Marylander. I grew up in Prince George's County with my mom, my dad, and my brother. My mental health journey didn't really kick off until I was 22. At the time, I was in my last semester of undergrad, and I got my undergraduate degree in sociology, which is essentially the study of the isms: classism, sexism, racism, etc. And part of sociology, you talk a lot about like family dynamics. I remember I had a class that was about like African American families and, different things that affect us in our community and child rearing, raising a family, etc. And I had this moment where they were talking about like dysfunctional things, and it was almost like someone threw cold water in my face. And I said, oh my gosh, like, hold on, some of these things actually happened to me when I was a child. And it's like everything just kind of fell apart for me after that. Um, I started to see a therapist in the summer. And at the time, I was on my mom's insurance in school. And to see like the primary care doctor, my copay was only like $10. To see a mental health professional, I was seeing a therapist, the copay was $85. And I was like, wait, what's going on? Like, why is it such a big difference in the cost? And so I think I saw that therapist maybe 2 or 3 times, but was deterred because of the expense. So I kind of just, sat with how I was feeling. And then school started back up. This would end up being my last semester before I graduated. So I went back to school that August, and like these feelings of just sadness and anxiety didn't go away. And I started to see a therapist through my school, which was significantly cheaper. I think it was only like maybe $10 a session. And I was seeing a psychologist and a psychiatrist. And I remember there was a night I was in my apartment. I was living by myself at the time that I just went to the kitchen and I picked up this knife and I just had this thought to myself, like, Jordan, just slit your wrist and be done with it. And I think I had a therapy appointment the next day with my psychologist. And I went there and I told her what happened. And they were like, oh, you should probably go to the hospital. And I said, yeah, you know what? That's right. You know what? I'll do that. I'll go home, I'll pack a bag, and I'll go to the hospital first thing tomorrow morning. They knew I was lying. So I ended up being what I think most people are familiar with, the California code of 5150. In Georgia, this is a 1013. So this is when a mental health professional or the police or someone deems you a danger to yourself or someone else. And I was in the back of a squad car. They took me to, like, my psychologist came with me, but they put me in the back of the squad car, the school's police.
Did they handcuff you?
I don't think I was handcuffed.
Okay.
Which was amazing.
Yeah.
I do not remember being handcuffed. I remember walking very calmly to the car. Police officer opened the car door. I sat in. Of course, like, you can't open the door when you're in the back of a squad car, so I couldn't get out anyway. But they carted me right on off from downtown Atlanta out to the west side. And I went to a psychiatric hospital. And I'm not going to lie. Oh, I was so angry. I was so angry. When I got there and I realized I was going to be stuck, I didn't have a chance to leave or go home and get a bag. All I had was the clothes on my back and the shoes on my feet. And I was hot. Like, I was so mad with my psychologist, and she was so sweet because she actually sat with me for a little while before she, it was time for her to go home. Shoot, this was about 6 o'clock in the evening. And I sat there in this waiting room for a long time before I was brought back, strip searched. That was uncomfortable. Strip searched, make sure I didn't have anything on me. And then there I was. They took me inside the psych unit, and I didn't know what to expect. I was kind of like you, like, you have these ideas of what life is like in the psych unit. And I honestly have to say it was not what I expected. Like, when I got back to my room, it was really late. And when I woke up the next day, y'all, I was hot. I remember the staff members were poking at me because they were like, oh, why are you here? Why are you here? And I remember saying, I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not supposed to be here. And they were laughing like, oh, something you did got you here. Ha, ha, ha. And I was like, dang, for real? But I ended up seeing the psychiatrist that next day. I meeting with a therapist. My mom came down from Maryland down to Georgia to come see me in the hospital. And I was just so upset that I was there.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the time I saw the psychiatrist, I think I got my first dose of medication. And then I also got a subsequent dose later on that day. And when I woke up the next morning, it was almost like night and day. My mood felt so much better, like, instantly. It was the craziest thing. And of course, like, in the hospital, you do, like, therapy sessions by yourself. There's a lot of group therapy. There's, like, art. So you're actually engaged in, like, treatment activities.
Mm-hmm.
There's also, like, a track for people that not only have a mental health disorder, but also have substance use. I actually ended up being diagnosed with depression, anxiety, and PTSD. And that was kind of like the journey. I did 3 days of inpatient mandatory. I did another 6 weeks, I think, of partial hospitalization where you can, you report to the hospital and then you go home in the evening time. So I did that. And yeah, that was the start of my journey. I've been in therapy ever since then. I would end up in the hospital another 3 times. Once inpatient and then 2 more for outpatient, which is like partial hospitalization. Again, you go there during the day and then you leave in the evening time, which, funny enough, is actually how we met.
Right, in the hospital.
Yes, we met at a partial hospitalization program here in Maryland. And I think this was the first time you were hospitalized too, right?
So no, so actually, I no, when I was hospitalized for the attempt in 2016.
Okay.
When
Okay.
I met you, this was the second time I was going into a PHP program.
Gotcha.
So PHP, you'll often hear us refer to it, which is partial hospitalization. And as Jordan mentioned, you go in the morning and you leave in the evening. It's like a full time job for 2 to 3 weeks, and it's a it's a very great experience. I feel like that what we've had.
Yes.
And so I remember Jordan, I met her. She was like probably her second to last day, maybe, or
Yes.
your last day
I
to
was
the
on my
hospital.
way out.
And I was just getting in, and we were sharing whatever we were talking about in group. I don't remember, but I just kind of remember like, you need to get her phone number. I know I just kind of told myself that I'm a person where I will ask someone for their contact information if I feel like, just to connect with somebody. I'm a people person. I'm pretty bubbly, and I just felt like there was something there that me and Jordan needed to connect. And we've been like friends, like, of course, ever since. And Jordan has really been like my ride or die. And I feel like everybody needs a Jordan. You can't have my Jordan, but you can find you a
Find you another
Jordan.
Jordan.
Yes. So, um, and Jordan has really been with me like every step of the way. And I feel like what we'll talk about in the podcast is really building that support network, because when I'm struggling and I'm like going through anything, Jordan is the person that I confide in. And especially if I'm struggling with suicidal ideation, because I still do struggle with it occasionally. And even like most recently, earlier, at the beginning of the year, I was like, Jordan, I'm starting to have these thoughts. And I didn't have a plan, which we're going to talk about too in like future episodes, active suicidal thoughts versus passive. And so essentially, active is when you have a plan and you intend to carry it out, and passive it would be like a thought like if I'm walking down the street and a car jumps the curb, like I'm not going to jump out of the way, and if it hits me and I die, like I'm fine with it. So
Right.
like you're not going to do anything, but if something happens, you're not going to try to stop it. That would
Right.
be a passive thought. So we even have like an episode where we're really diving more into that.
Mhm.
But that's where I was. I was more passive, and I remember just kind of thinking to myself, I didn't really want to go to the hospital, but Jordan was like, "No, I'm coming to your house and I'm taking you."
I was there the same evening.
Yes, she was there. And so I feel like Jordan has been very vital when it comes to like my mental health, but just like having that person that you can go to, because I have other friends where they're not as educated, and the first thing they're going to do is call the police. And it's like, hold up, before we do that, I didn't say I was going to do it. Sometimes people just need a safe space to talk.
Yes.
That doesn't mean that they're going to do it, or that you're going to put the idea in their head if you suspect they might be suicidal.
Right.
And so that's why I know there are certain people in my life that if I'm struggling with those thoughts, I'm not going to call them, because they're not going to know how to respond, or they're going to be uncomfortable, or whatever they might think. So Jordan is like my person when it gets that dark.
Yeah, I think too, we're going to talk about later. Like, there are things when you tell someone, depending on how they respond, they may mean well, but there are things that aren't actually helpful to us in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why it's important to have someone in your life who does understand, and who won't react in a way that, won't be helpful for you. Um, so yeah, that's a bit of our background story and why we decided to do the podcast. We'll get into that.
Yeah, because like this suicide is something very comfortable that we talk about. It's a part of
Yes.
our, not, we don't talk about it every day, but it's to the point where it's normalized within our relationship,
Right.
where it's something that we talk about, whether we're talking about what's happening in the community or in
Right.
the world, or people who come to us to share that, because people often come to me and Jordan where when they're struggling with suicidal thoughts. So we've become that for other people as well. And so, really, the goal of the podcast is we want to normalize talking about suicide in the Black community because it's not a white thing.
Oh yeah.
And
Oh yeah.
we, that could be a whole thing. But I feel like we should share like some fun things about us too, because the podcast, it can be dark and a very hard topic to talk about, but we do fun things too, and we talk we talk about other things outside of suicide
Yes.
too. So I am so like really what I like to do for fun. I like to work out at my all women's gym, which is super fun and supportive. I like to travel. My favorite color is orange.
And leopard.
Yes, leopard
Mhm.
is a
It's a
color.
color.
It's
Hmm.
it's a color. So y'all gonna always see me with something leopard. I promise. My little water jug right now is leopard. I always have at least one thing on me. I am the oldest of seven children. I am from New Jersey. I'm a very proud Howard graduate, as I mentioned before.
The real HU.
Yes,
Hmm.
the first one before Hampton was HI. So yes, let's make it known. And I enjoy traveling. Jordan is like a travel buddy of mine. I really been wanting to travel more with Jordan. So we really started like doing stuff last year. We went to Canada
Yes.
last year.
Oh, it was great.
Yeah, we went to Toronto and Niagara Falls,
Yeah,
and
it was
we
beautiful.
had a time. Like Jordan is great because she's that friend that's down with almost anything. Like if I'm like Jordan, I want to do whatever, and she's like, "All right, let's
Okay.
go." Like
Yeah.
like she's that person. So um, and I'm also, of course, not just doing this podcast, but Jordan and I'll let her talk about it, but work in the mental health field as well. So we are both peer support specialists. Sometimes, and depending on where you live, they may call them recovery coaches. They may call them certified peer support specialists, or they may call them um, community health workers. It just kind of depends on the organization that you work for or with. And we're people who live with mental health challenges or substance use for some, and we work with individuals who may not be as far along in their recovery. And so I didn't even mention though that so my original diagnosis was major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder. And in the beginning of the pandemic, it changed to bipolar disorder. And so we could talk about that. But so yeah, so I also work in the field. I have my own company, the Mental Health Empowerment Agency, where we offer mental health trainings to community members. I also train organizations where they have their staff to take mental health trainings, as well as people who are pursuing their peer certification and they need the credits before they can take their state test. And I really, started the company because it's my passion. I enjoy talking about mental health, suicide prevention. I love trainings. I love public speaking. So my world is mental health, not just in terms of struggling with it, but also the field that I work in as well. So that's some more about me.
So about me, gosh, what do I love to do? I love swimming. I haven't been swimming in a while, but I love it. I too love traveling. Like she said earlier, like Canada was great. Um, I love reading. I like to read like dry stuff and like textbooks and dry materials. But I have been getting into more like fiction and stuff too, and that's been cool. Um, like she said, I worked as a peer recovery coach, and interestingly enough, I have no history of substance use. But working as a peer, my experience is on the substance use side. And it's often the case that people that have a substance use disorder also have a co occurring mental health disorder. So a lot of times the substances are being used as a means of self medicating.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't find it too difficult to actually relate to, clients or patients, because we did have that commonality of having a mental health disorder. And a lot of times it's, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, PTSD. And it's been interesting. I've done that type of work in both a residential setting and in the emergency room. which, in an emergency room, you see patients at their lowest usually. They're either coming in because they're very, very sick from substance use or from complications of substance use, like if they're drinking, maybe something's wrong with their liver, or if they, uh, you know, inject medication, maybe something's wrong with their skin or there's an infection, etc. So we tend to see people, at their lowest, and that's what's beneficial about actually having a peer recovery coach or peer support specialist. We're not doctors, we're not nurses, we're not psychiatrists, psychologists, nurse practitioners, but we are people with lived experience, and we're able to connect in a way that a doctor or a therapist can't or wouldn't because it's against their, ethical code to do so. But we're able to have like those real conversations and kind of gauge,
Mhm.
their willingness to change their behavior. And yeah, it's been one journey. I actually love being a peer. Um,
I was going
yeah.
to add something to that. So, yeah, so my experience have been on the mental health side in terms of the peer support work. But I'm so glad, I feel like I need to bring attention to this. Jordan, if you notice, we're going to educate y'all too on word choice and
Oh
person
yes.
centered language. So, Jordan talked about in terms of substance use. So, we don't say substance abuse because a lot of people feel like that's offensive, because when you say abuse in the sense of like, it's almost like placing blame on them, or they are or they could have some sort of control, when really there's a lot of stigma surrounding addiction.
Oh
And
yes.
people, that addiction is not, it's very hard. People see it as a choice, like why can't they just stop, like it's so easy. But think about, there are a lot of things in our lives that are not a, where we don't have an addiction, but we just can't stop, like it's so
Right.
hard. Like people say, like, oh, if you're overweight, well, just stop eating, just stop, or just exercise. Like nothing is just that easy. And
Right.
I feel like when it comes to addiction, it's more stigmatized than mental health, because I feel like people have less compassion for people with addiction.
Oh yes.
And I'm not saying that people with addiction or who struggle with addiction, that they shouldn't, that we shouldn't hold them accountable,
Mm-hmm.
or that they, but at the same time, they still need compassion. I feel like we have more people, compassion and empathy for people who struggle with their mental health.
Right.
And I do, as someone who has a parent, my dad struggles with addiction to this day, and has been my entire life, and I'm in my 30s. So I've watched my dad struggle with it, and it's like I don't have a ill I don't what's the best way to put it? It's like I don't hate my dad, or I don't have any negative feelings towards him, because I do realize that addiction is a sickness,
Mm-hmm.
and an illness, and it should be treated as such. And so when we talk about person centered language, it's someone who lives with a substance use disorder, or they struggle with addiction. We don't call them addicts. We don't call them crackheads. Unless the person, people tend to make jokes depending on
Mm-hmm.
their, depending on how it's being talked about, or depending on how they may want to refer to themselves. But when we're actually in terms of education and actually being in the field, it's a person who lives with, you put that person and then you put the diagnosis.
Right.
Because like for me, I don't say I'm bipolar. No, I'm someone who lives with bipolar disorder.
Right.
With depression, I'm someone who lives with depression. Like our diagnosis is not our identity.
Right.
And I feel like that's what people tend to do. And that's why we want to make sure that when we're talking on the podcast, that we're really doing things to destigmatize, but also provide the correct language surrounding things as well. So I feel like that's something to point out. I don't know if there's something else you wanted to add to that.
Yes. Putting, how would I want to say? Um, Reducing someone to their mental illness or their struggle with substances like takes away their humanity. And when you empower people and remind people that, they have a life worth living too, that's what really kind of helps foster change for individuals. And also, substance use, it's a chemical dependency. It's literally that. Like people that say drink alcohol all the time, their body is so adjusted to functioning with alcohol that if they were just to quit cold turkey, it can cause seizures. It's unsafe. They really want you to detox under the supervision of like a program or a doctor or someone who could monitor your condition because it's dangerous. Your body actually, with substance use, becomes dependent on that substance. So it's not a matter of, oh, they should just be able to stop. That's why they experience withdrawal and, uncomfortable sensations when they're coming off of substances because their body's so used to it. So it's so easy to say, like, oh, they can just stop anytime they wanted to, but that's not necessarily true. And
Yeah.
they are people. They're people. They're people dealing with something that's really hard to overcome. But I've seen people do it all the time, all the time. And it's the most rewarding thing.
Yeah, and it's like I'm getting so emotional because it's like not just my dad, but I have tons of family members, tons like who struggle with addiction. And like just in 2019, I lost my 23-year-old cousin to addiction. She overdosed. And it's like that's why I'm so passionate about this work because 23 is still people view it as like almost a baby.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't even get a chance to live, her life, to be able to do things that she wanted to do, live out her dreams, have children. She didn't get a chance to do any of that. And so that's why sometimes people may view it as me being sensitive in terms of if I go to correct someone in terms of language or turn it as a teachable moment or whatever, but it's because it's so near and dear. Like my cousin will never be able to have the opportunity to in terms of recover or think because people that are in recovery, like we have dreams, we have goals, we have hopes, we have ambitions. So that's why I do the work that I do. And I do realize that there it could be a different type of a struggle when it terms in terms of working on the substance use side.
Oh, man.
um I don't, and that's why for me, because it's so close to home, I tend to focus my side on, I tend to focus on the mental health side, but I do still talk about it, and I still do have like empathy for people who struggle with addiction, because even just finished taking the CCAR training, and the CCAR
Yeah.
is Connecticut Community, I think,
Addiction
addictions, I think, recovery.
recovery.
And I took a 16 hours ethics training, and it was that training is specifically for people who are pursuing their peer certification, or they call them recovery coaches as well. um, and most people who were in the training that I took, that's actually a training geared toward addiction. And so it's really important that I remain knowledgeable uh, in addictions as well, because a lot of people who do struggle with addiction have, like Jordan said, a mental health
Yes.
diagnosis, and that's referred to as co-occurring. We want to make sure that when we're saying acronyms and things, because people could be
Right.
confused because we're so used to saying things that other people may not know. And so in terms of like with the podcast, we really want to just share what the flow of the show will be like with each episode. So I'll let Jordan share that.
So when we get into it, we're gonna do like a little wellness check, so to speak, where we kind of just talk about how we're doing. Because I feel like when we're as Americans anyway, we're conditioned to respond to people when they say, how are you? And then we say, oh, I'm fine. I'm good. Like it's just a natural expected response. So we're trying to get people more in tune to kind of really talk about how you're feeling. Now, of course, that's probably not appropriate all the time, but I do think it's important to kind of really tap into yourself, get in touch with really how you're feeling.
Oh, Jordan,
Yes,
I have to say something. I didn't mean to cut
please
you off.
do.
So she said, like, I'm fine. I learned in the hospital the acronym FINE, feelings I'm not expressing.
Oh, I never heard that one. That's a good one.
I was like, oh, I had to mention that one because the biggest pet peeve of mine, and it may be a little over the top, is like when I'm like walking in the grocery store, or like if I'm in passing in the elevator and someone will say, "Hi, how are you?" And it's like, let's be real. A complete stranger probably really don't care how I'm doing,
Right.
because if I'm in the elevator and you say, "Hey, how are you?" You're probably running to work or doing something. If I say like, "Oh, my dog died," or like, I'm struggling with suicidal thoughts, that person's going to be like, "Whoa, I wasn't ready for that." So that's why I feel like people should say like, "Have a good day," sending you positive vibes. Like if you don't have time to actually stop and you really are really kind of don't care, like how are you means is like a question, and
Right.
then that kind of I'm fine doesn't, it's like, are you really do you really have time, or do you really care
Right.
about how someone is doing? So a lot of times this is probably not good, but I'm just going to keep it real. If someone asks me like how I'm doing, like the cashier or something, sometimes I ignore the question if I'm struggling. Or I'll say like or say something like, "Oh, I had better days," or "I look forward to better days," or something like that, because it's very hard. I feel like if you're gonna say how are you, the person should be ready. And I feel like in American culture, we're so used to the hustle and bustle and grow and moving so fast that a lot of times when people say how are you, they're still walking
That
and
is
like
true.
passing, so you don't even have time to
Right.
respond to say, and a lot of times when I have ignored the question in passing or not responded, they just keep going.
Right.
So that's why when you talk about having like a wellness check, we really want to make sure that like I really, like, if I ask somebody how they're doing, like I genuinely care. If I don't have the time to stop, or I'll say like, "Have a good day. I hope you have better days," or something along the lines of not feeling like I'm being in a rush, or like ingenuine. Um, so that's why we feel like it's super important to have to check in and to be really honest and open, like
Right.
like about your feelings and sitting with it in terms of like your emotions. Because I remember even when we met on Friday, and you like, "How are you?" Like I had a whole mouthful for Jordan. Like I was telling her, said, "These are all the emotions I'm experiencing, 4 different emotions, and I'm going to be very specific about these emotions that I'm feeling." And so I get that, it takes a lot to have like a safe space to share in terms of what might be appropriate, because like you said, it has to be appropriate in
Right.
terms of if you're out in public. So I just kind of like to caution people to say like, if you don't have the time or you don't really care, don't say how are you, just say have a good day, or say
Good to see you. Something.
yeah, good to see you, a sentence. Don't really ask how the person is doing if you don't have the time and you genuinely don't care.
But
That's like,
someone might answer you honestly.
right. And
And
then
what are you going to do with that?
exactly. What are you going to do? And so we will always open our episodes with the start with the wellness check. We will also we have our hero or our spotlight segment,
Yes.
where we're going to shine a light on a individual who is a survivor of suicide, or they lost a relative to suicide, or unfortunately we have lost people to suicide. So we'll always highlight an individual who has some sort of a connection to suicide, just because we want to make sure that we are honoring these people, but also that we're bringing light to it, to let people know like, you are not alone. There are people having struggling with suicidal thoughts is actually very common,
Yes, very
and we think it's not. Some people may not, because I remember I had a friend was just like, "Why would somebody want to do that?" And she kind of asked me, um, well, she wasn't even like kind of saying, she was just asking a question. She just couldn't wrap her head around why someone would want to do that. And so some people can't relate, but there are millions of us who can. And so that's why we want to make sure that we are paying homage and honoring people. I don't know. There's something else. You can talk about the other segments.
Sure. So then we have like our general topic that we're going to get into. And the topic, of course, of this first episode is an introduction, kind of explaining why we wanted to do this podcast. I imagine some people are going to see the title of this podcast and say, "Black people do what?" So, yeah, we just wanted to introduce ourselves and why we wanted to do this episode. And then we'll also get into some resources. You guys, there are some fantastic mental health resources, many of which that cost absolutely nothing to participate. And we're gonna, shed light on those things and make people aware. And then we're gonna have a moment of inspiration. So we'll close out our episodes with something, something positive, something to keep you going, because we know that this topic can be a little bit heavy, but we want to give you, leave you with something that you can take with you and kind of, you know, move forward.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that is our segment in terms of what the show will be like. And we'll also have guests too as well. So we have some guests and I'm super excited to bring them into the studio to talk because those conversations are gonna get real and deep. Y'all may have to get y'all Kleenex,
Mm.
have that, have your coffee or whatever you want to sip on, of your choosing, whatever you need to do for your libations, you choose whatever you might want to do. But we're super excited. I'm like so grateful, and we got a shout out to Digital Impact Studios
Yes.
because they have been great with working with us and supporting our vision. I previously had a podcast. It was not video though, and it was the Fireflies Unite podcast with T-Kea, and it was a great show. It had a great run for 3 years, but it came very overwhelming doing the editing, the producing, doing really doing everything. I was a one woman show, and it became a lot. And so now I'm really excited about the birth of our new baby together because I'm get ready. I'm doing something with Jordan is someone I consider actually as a best friend because she's just super supportive. And it's great to do something I feel like with a friend to the point where you have bonded over something like so sensitive,
Right.
and
Right.
you've shared the most vulnerable parts of yourself. So I look forward to sharing, to growing, and really just building our community and bringing light to a very dark and topic, but it needs to be discussed.
So, to wrap things up, we will leave you with a bit of inspiration. And this comes from an African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. So the idea behind this, myself, I am an isolator. I think T-Kea probably is like, yeah. And one thing that I've learned about recovery in mental health, substance use, co-occurring, whatever, is the importance of building a network of support around yourself. And we're hoping that this podcast can be added to uh to your to your
Daily,
toolbox, if
yes,
you will.
yeah, your toolbox. Okay, let's talk about that.
And be added to your toolbox as, a resource, a place where you can come and just listen to our ideas about mental health. And we'll also get into more resources. As I mentioned earlier, there's a ton that are completely free. I mean, there is some really good help out here. And we just think it's really important that you have people that you can have safe conversations with, as T-Kea mentioned earlier, where you can really express what you're feeling and get feedback, or, just build a community for yourself. Because sometimes as Black people, we don't always have that built in. Sometimes we have to create that family for ourselves. So I think that's important.
Absolutely. And just letting people know, like, you're not alone. You really are not. You may feel like you're alone
Yes.
because it can be very lonely, but it's up to us to really build that community. And so Jordan and I are doing that our for our community. This episode was sponsored by the Mental Health Empowerment Agency, where its mission is to dismantle the mental health stigma and raise awareness of suicide prevention through curated events, individual and group peer support, digital and social media, and educational trainings.